In the vast expanse of the Milky Way, where civilizations had risen and fallen like cosmic tides, some with more grace than others, the Galactic Confederation of Enlightened Species considered itself the pinnacle of evolution. How adorable! For 12,000 years, these self-proclaimed masters of the universe had been cataloging, analyzing, and occasionally patronizing every new species they encountered. Their colossal databases meticulously documented precisely 4,886 spacefaring civilizations, each neatly categorized by technological advancement, cultural sophistication, and, most importantly, their potential threat level to the established order. The Confederation adored its categories almost as much as it loved reminding everyone else that it had invented the concept of categorization in the first place. Near the bottom of this cosmic hierarchy sat humanity. The bipedal mammals from an unremarkable spiral arm of the galaxy had achieved faster-than-light travel a mere 3 centuries ago, practically yesterday in galactic terms. When first assessed, humans were labeled as moderately interesting primates with inexplicably high survival rates and concerning military potential. High praise, really, considering the source. Yet what truly puzzled the elder races of the galaxy wasn't humanity's rapid technological growth. After all, many species experienced evolutionary surges before inevitably plateauing into mediocrity. No, the real mystery was the bizarre respect humans commanded despite their junior status. Even the notoriously snobbish Vixar, who regarded most species as beneath their notice, maintained unusually wide berths around human territories. When pressed, veteran diplomats and traders would mutter vague warnings about respecting human customs and, most curiously, about avoiding their so-called sacred sites. The official Confederation guidelines recommended extreme caution when negotiating territorial boundaries with humans, particularly concerning areas they designated as hallowed ground. Of course, in their infinite wisdom, the High Council interpreted this as nothing more than a quaint, primitive superstition, something for sophisticated species to study, but certainly not to take seriously. And that, dear listeners of the cosmic narrative, is precisely the sort of thinking that leads to catastrophic misunderstandings of interstellar proportions, the kind that rewrite galactic power structures overnight. The kind that make arrogant civilizations suddenly very, very interested in the meaning of human graveyards. The Confederation's Bureau of Xenocultural Studies had devoted an entire research wing to what they termed human thanatological peculiarities, because nothing says scientific objectivity like needlessly complicated terminology for death-related matters. The leading expert in this niche field, Dr. Zell Crum, had published 17 volumes on human burial practices, each more speculative than the last. These works were displayed in their own hermetically sealed cases, presumably to prevent contamination by their dubious conclusions. Dr. Crum, in lectures delivered to increasingly disinterested students, would often expound upon humanity's extraordinary devotion to the preservation and demarcation of their deceased. Rather than efficiently recycling organic remains, humans segregated them in designated zones, marked them with elaborate stone indicators, and, here, the good doctor always paused for dramatic effect, they continued to visit and maintain these sites for centuries. But what truly baffled the galactic community was the sheer scale of these operations. Humans didn't just set aside small containment fields for their dead. They dedicated vast tracts of prime real estate to cemeteries and memorial parks, some spanning hundreds of kilometers. These weren't mere storage sites for biological waste. They were monuments, sacred grounds imbued with meaning, and the galaxy was about to learn why that mattered. Some of humanity's largest cemeteries spanned hundreds of square kilometers, dating back to an era before they had even mastered powered flight. The oldest among them were so revered that they were protected by international treaties, some of which predated their unified world government. These were not just burial sites. They were historical and cultural landmarks, preserved with a reverence the rest of the galaxy found utterly baffling. The most prestigious xenoanthropological journal in the Confederation, Primitive Practices Quarterly, dedicated an entire issue to this perplexing human behavior. The cover story, Wasted Space, the economic irrationality of human corpse storage, argued that humanity's refusal to repurpose these lands was an evolutionary relic, primitive superstition reinforced by biochemical fear responses to decomposition. The author received the Confederation's highest academic honor for this so-called groundbreaking insight, but not everyone in the galactic community was convinced by such simplistic conclusions. Some, particularly the more pragmatic members of the interstellar trade and military sectors, had very different theories. Admiral Telk of the Hazrati merchant fleet was one such skeptic. On a routine trading mission to a human colony, he made an unsettling observation. Human burial grounds were always meticulously maintained, no matter their age or location. They guard these places like military installations, he reported. My scanners detected unusual energy signatures from beneath the surface, but when I inquired about them, the humans became agitated. Confederation military intelligence dismissed Admiral Telk's report as the paranoid ramblings of a trader who had spent too much time among so-called barbarians. Their official assessment concluded that humans simply suffered from an irrational attachment to their genetic predecessors, a sentimental weakness that more evolved species had long since outgrown. Even the notoriously aloof Vixar, a species that generally regarded other civilizations with open disdain, saw fit to issue a rare warning. During a High Council meeting, their ambassador broke protocol to caution against interfering with human memorial grounds. They consider any disturbance of these sites a provocation beyond diplomatic remedy, the ambassador stated flatly. We recommend absolute avoidance. The Council, in its infinite bureaucratic wisdom, responded with the administrative equivalent of an eye roll and filed the warning under primitive customs, tolerable but ignorable. After all, what could possibly be so important about fields of dead matter that even the fearsome Vixar treated them with deference? The galaxy would soon find out, and the lesson would be explosive. Fleet Commander Zolv DRX of the Kari expansion Force had built his career on seizing opportunities before anyone else realized they existed. 6 promotions in 8 cycles, all earned through his uncanny ability to identify vulnerable territories and acquire them with minimal resistance. His superiors called it strategic brilliance. Everyone else called it glorified theft with excellent. Paperwork DRX's latest target was Harmony Point, a modestly populated human colony on the edge of Confederation space. Rich in rare mineral deposits and blessed with a perfectly balanced biosphere, it was precisely the kind of planetary jewel the Kari Expansionary Committee had recently developed a sudden interest in protecting for the greater galactic good. Of course, the intelligence report, Commander, his adjutant announced, placing a data crystal on DRX's desk with the enthusiasm of someone delivering expired rations. DRX skimmed the report with practiced indifference. Population centers, defensive capabilities, negotiation history, standard metrics to determine how quickly he could claim the planet without triggering formal Confederation intervention. Then something unusual caught his attention. 23% of habitable land designated as restricted zones. His talons tapped against the desk. And they're not even using them for anything? The adjutant shifted uncomfortably. Those are what humans call cemeteries, sir. They bury their dead there. Darker X's mandibles twitched in disbelief. You mean to tell me they take perfectly viable land, dump dead bodies in it, and then maintain the site like a sacred monument? He scoffed. What an extraordinary waste of resources. He expanded the planetary survey map, his eyes narrowing at a particular section. And look at this one, he muttered, incredulous. Nearly 80 square kilometers, locked away for the sake of rotting corpses. To him, it was sheer madness. A failure of logic so vast it defied reason. And yet, despite his derision, the one thing Dr. X didn't ask was why. That was his first mistake. Nearly 80 square kilometers of prime valley real estate, completely off limits, filled with nothing but grave markers, and it sat right next to the planet's largest human settlement. The Planetary Survey notes that it's their oldest and most revered site, sir, the adjutant explained. It predates their colonization. They actually transported ancestral remains from their homeworld to establish it. Fleet Commander Zov Darex's eyes gleamed with the special light reserved for particularly easy targets, which means it has significant cultural value but likely minimal practical defenses. He pulled up the tactical display. Perfect. We land our primary forces here, adjacent to this first expedition cemetery. The humans will be so concerned about protecting their ridiculous bone garden that they won't be able to mount an effective defense of their actual strategic assets. His tactical officer, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up. Sir, there are previous advisories regarding human burial sites. The Vexar specifically. The Vexar are superstitious relics who see threats in shadows, Diardex interrupted, waving a dismissive appendage. Besides, we're not planning to disturb their precious dead, we're just using the location as a strategic entry point. But, sir, the decision is made. Dr. X's tone left no room for argument. Officer Kren, prepare landing coordinates adjacent to the human death collection facility. We'll be on the ground in 36 hours. As the command crew dispersed to prepare for the invasion, DRX congratulated himself on his tactical brilliance. The humans would be so preoccupied with protecting their field of bones that claiming the rest of the colony would be embarrassingly simple. Another easy victory for his impeccable record, another resource world secured for the Kari. In the privacy of his quarters, he even practiced his victory speech, the one where he would magnanimously promise to respect local customs regarding their dead while, of course, stripping the colony of every valuable resource. The Confederation would approve the acquisition without hesitation. After all, he was being culturally sensitive to humanity's strange fixation on preserving their deceased. As the massive Kari warships descended toward Harmony Point, not a single crew member questioned why the human defenders weren't scrambling in panic. No tactical officer thought to ask why the human emergency broadcasts were not pleading for mercy, but instead contained repeated urgent warnings. Kari forces, redirect your landing zone immediately, and certainly, no one aboard the invasion fleet suspected that they were about to provide the entire galactic community with a profoundly educational moment about the true nature of human graveyards. The Harmony Point Colonial Administration building erupted into frenzied activity the moment the Kari fleet appeared on long-range scanners. But this was not the blind panic of a primitive species facing invasion. No. This was something else entirely. This was the methodical, almost resigned efficiency of people who had run this particular drill before. Open emergency channels to the Kari flagship, Governor Reyes ordered, straightening her uniform with the weary determination of someone about to have an extremely tedious conversation. And get me the Terran Defense Command. Tell them, she sighed, rubbing her temples, we have another cemetery situation. The communications officer nodded. Kari responding, ma'am. They're offering us generous terms of surrender, full cultural autonomy regarding our ancestral storage facilities. A collective sigh rippled through the command center. Someone in the back muttered, "It's always the new ones, isn't it?" Several knowing chuckles followed. Governor Reyes took her position at the communications station as Commander Dort X's alien features appeared on screen, arranged into what he probably thought was a reassuring expression. Commander Dr. X's expression, what was likely meant to be reassuring, resembled a predator suffering from indigestion. Commander Dr. X, Governor Reyes began, her tone measured but firm. We've noticed that your landing trajectory is set directly toward our colonial memorial grounds. We must insist you redirect to the designated diplomatic landing zone in Sector 7. Dr. X's mandibles twitched in what humans had learned was the Kari equivalent of a condescending smile. Governor, I assure you, we have no intention of disturbing your cultural sites. Our landing is purely strategic and temporary. It's not about disturbance, Commander, Reyes replied, tension creeping into her voice. Those grounds are designated as absolutely restricted for very specific reasons. DRX waved an impatient appendage. I understand your species has certain primitive attachments to these sites, but tactical necessity requires... This isn't about sentiment, Reyes cut in sharply, her patience thinning. This is about preventing an interstellar incident. Those grounds are protected under Terran Defense Protocol 37B. The Kari commander made a dismissive gesture. Yes, we've reviewed your adorable legal protections. Rest assured, once your colony accepts our protection, we'll establish proper regulations for your ancestral waste facilities. At that moment, Admiral Chen of the Terran Defense Command joined the communication. His face betrayed no emotion, his voice coldly formal. Commander DRX, I am obligated to inform you that landing within 1 kilometer of any designated Terran memorial ground constitutes a Class 1 violation of our sovereign territory. Dr. X's response was smooth, laced with condescension. Diplomatic intimidation is beneath the dignity of this operation, Admiral. We are simply establishing a presence to ensure the proper integration of Harmony Point into the greater galactic community. Chen's expression didn't change. It was the kind of neutrality that made hardened space veterans reconsider their life choices. This is your final warning, Commander, he said, his voice calm. Redirect your landing craft immediately, or we will consider your actions a direct attack on sovereign Terran territory, with all corresponding consequences. Dr. X's mandibles clicked in amusement. Your bluff is noted, Admiral. He radiated the smug confidence of someone who believed they were calling a bluff, when in fact they were walking straight into a minefield. Literally. We will proceed as planned. Carry out. The transmission ended. Governor Reyes turned. To Admiral Chen, rubbing her temples. They never listen, do they? No, the Admiral replied, already entering the evacuation warning codes. They never do. He turned to his staff. Initiate Cemetery Defense Protocol and get ready. For the paperwork, the Confederation is going to be very upset about this particular learning opportunity. Commander Dr. X stood on his flagship, watching with satisfaction as the landing vessels descended toward Harmony Point. Below, the tactical display showed the cemetery stretching across the valley, perfectly flat, minimal vegetation, and conveniently adjacent to the colony's largest settlement, an ideal landing zone by any military standard. Sir, his sensor officer called out hesitantly, I'm detecting unusual energy signatures from the human burial grounds. DRX barely glanced at the readings. Probably just scanning equipment they set up to monitor their precious dead, he scoffed. Nothing to concern ourselves with. Sir, these readings are consistent with advanced quantum field manipulations. They appear to be... Officer Trin, DRX interrupted, his tone patronizing. If the humans had advanced quantum technology, they wouldn't be wasting it guarding, decomposing organic matter. He delivered the statement with the special kind of confidence reserved for those about to feature prominently in cautionary historical documents. Below, the first landing craft was now less than 5 kilometers from the cemetery perimeter, on Seu. The surface, human defenders had formed a perimeter at a very precise distance from the burial ground's edge, suspiciously precise. None of the human defenders appeared to be taking up defensive positions or preparing weapons. In fact, several seemed to be calmly evacuating the area. Sir, they're retreating, the tactical officer reported, his voice laced with confusion. Dart X purred in satisfaction. As expected, their intimidation tactics failed, and now they're... He never finished his sentence. At that exact moment, the first landing craft crossed an invisible boundary, precisely 1 kilometer from the cemetery's edge. What happened next would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for centuries to come. The entire cemetery, all 80 square kilometers of it, suddenly ignited with a lattice of blue-white energy that shot skyward in a perfect geometric column. Within microseconds, intricate patterns resolved within the field, forming what specialists would later identify as quantum entanglement matrices of unimaginable complexity. X's mandibles twitched violently as his professional demeanor shattered. Like cheap ceremonial glass. "What in the seven moons is that?" he gasped. The sensor officer's voice took on a detached, almost clinical tone, the sound of a mind shifting into scientific observation in the face of overwhelming disaster. "Sir, it appears each burial marker is actually a quantum anchor. Point. They aren't just memorials, they're nodes in a massive defense grid." On the tactical display, the bridge crew watched in stunned horror as the lead landing craft reached the luminous field. And vanished. Not destroyed, not disintegrated, simply gone, erased from existence, as though it had never been there at all. The quantum field pulsed once, absorbing the energy that had once been a heavily armed military transport carrying 50 elite Kiari soldiers. RX's eyes widened in sheer visceral terror. "Emergency retreat!" he screamed, finally grasping the magnitude of his error. "All vessels, immediate withdrawal!" But it was already too late. The quantum field expanded outward, sweeping through the landing zone with clinical precision. Every Kiari vessel that had breached the 1-kilometer boundary flickered and disappeared. One by one, the ships blinked out of reality, removed from the universe with horrifying efficiency. Back in the Harmony Point Defense Headquarters, a human technician provided a calm explanation to Governor Reyes. "The system worked exactly as designed, ma'am," he reported. "Each gravestone serves as a quantum entanglement node linked to every other cemetery in human space. When activated, they create a dimensional inversion field that transfers intruding matter into a secure pocket dimension." "And the intruders?" the governor asked. The technician shrugged. "Technically, they still exist, just not in our universe anymore." He gestured to a display, where a set of calculations scrolled rapidly across the screen. "The chances of randomly locating the exact pocket dimension they were sent to," he continued, "are mathematically equivalent to pinpointing a single electron in the entire galaxy." Aboard the retreating Kiari flagship, a shell-shocked Commander DRX received an incoming transmission. Admiral Chen's face appeared on screen, expression unreadable. "As you've now observed," the Admiral began, his voice cool and deliberate, "human cemeteries are not simply cultural sites." Dr. X's mandibles trembled, but he said nothing. "Each human burial includes a quantum entanglement capsule," Chen continued, "which transforms the remains into a node within our defensive network. Each marker resonates with all others, forming the largest quantum computing system in known space." This is impossible," Dr. X stammered, his mind struggling to process the implications. "Why would you use your dead as a defense system?" Admiral Chen's eyes hardened. "Who better to entrust with the protection of the living," he replied, "than those who have already given everything for them?" Dr. X sat frozen, unable to speak. "Every human who chooses burial," Chen continued, "knows they will continue to serve as guardians. It's not waste storage, Commander." He leaned forward slightly, his voice cold as steel. "It is our most sacred duty, and our most advanced defense." The bridge of the Kiari flagship was silent, save for the hum of the retreating engines. Chen's expression remained unreadable as he delivered his final words. "The quantum signatures of our honored dead create unique computational patterns, impossible to replicate, impossible to hack. Each new burial strengthens the network. Each cemetery is both a place of remembrance and a fortress." An impenetrable fortress," Dr. X whispered. His voice was barely audible, the weight of realization crushing him. "But the energy requirements alone would be impossible with conventional technology." "Yes," Admiral Chen agreed, his tone unreadable. But the quantum entanglement between the living brain patterns, preserved at the time of death, creates a self-sustaining energy loop. Our ancestors power their own defense grid. The full implications sank in, and with dawning horror, Deus Ex understood the truth. Humans hadn't just colonized the galaxy with their living population. Every human settlement, whether a tiny outpost or a sprawling metropolis, was protected by the quantum signatures of their dead. Generations of fallen soldiers, civilians, and pioneers, all linked in a vast, self-perpetuating defensive network that spanned every human world. Darix's mandibles clicked in stunned disbelief. The Confederation will hear about this deception, he finally managed. It wasn't deception, Chen corrected calmly. We filed complete documentation with the Confederation regarding our cultural sites and their defensive capabilities. It's all in the public record, classified under human thanatological practices. He allowed a brief pause before delivering. The final blow. Your intelligence services simply assumed it was superstitious nonsense. Below them, the quantum field finally dissipated, leaving the cemetery looking exactly as it had before. Peaceful, serene, and utterly lethal to those who failed to respect it. News traveled fast in a universe connected by quantum entanglement communications. Ironically, it was a technology humans had apparently mastered generations ago, while the rest of the galaxy still believed they were struggling with faster-than-light propulsion. Within 72 hours of what the Galactic News Network euphemistically dubbed the Harmony Point Incident, every sentient species with access to interstellar media was buzzing with speculation. Humans have been using their dead as weapons all along, screamed the Region information networks. Primitive burial rituals. Actually advanced defense grid, declared the Andromedan Science Digest. The tabloids, never ones to miss an opportunity for sensationalism, went with the more direct. Human graveyards are actually quantum death traps. The Confederation Council called an emergency session, their third in 5,000 years, and the first not precipitated by an impending supernova or galactic pandemic. Representatives from all major species crowded the massive chamber, a chaotic cacophony of concerned clicks, whistles, and electromagnetic pulses filling the air. The humans have violated the spirit of our technological disclosure agreements, thundered the Zeth-Tali ambassador, their photosynthetic appendages flashing angry patterns of red and orange. Technically, countered the Rexar representative, with the smug tone of someone who had been telling everyone so for centuries. They documented everything in their cultural exchange materials. Section 42, subsection J of their Burial Customs and Practices Report clearly states, human memorial grounds serve as both cultural sites and integral components of planetary defense systems through quantum resonance technology. An uncomfortable silence fell over the chamber. Hundreds of diplomats simultaneously commanded their assistants to search for this document, one they had all received 3 centuries ago and promptly filed under primitive superstitions. No action required. In military command centers across the galaxy, strategic maps were being hastily redrawn. Every human cemetery, from the massive memorial parks on Earth to the smallest frontier burial grounds, was now marked with flashing red boundaries and extreme caution warnings. Admiral Verax of the Marini Expeditionary Force, who had been preparing his own incursion into human space, quietly redirected his fleet to an uninhabited system for training exercises that would, conveniently, last until his retirement. On the most watched scientific program in the galaxy, Professor Ciel addressed a captivated audience. It's not just the technology, he explained, his tone grave. It's the psychology we failed to understand. Humans do not merely respect their dead, they actively incorporate them into their strategic defense systems. Every individual who chooses burial understands that they will become part of an expanding quantum network, their consciousness patterns preserved at the moment of death. These unique quantum signatures power and control sophisticated defensive systems, making human burial sites far more than just places of mourning. They aren't just sentimental about their ancestors, a non-human analyst clarified during a confidential briefing. They're actively maintaining and strengthening defense installations with every burial. Precisely, another expert confirmed. Each new burial strengthens the network, making it an evolving, self-sustaining security grid. It's brilliant in its design, if somewhat unsettling. When the Confederation first encountered this unexpected facet of human culture, diplomatic channels were flooded with concerns. A human representative addressed these growing anxieties in an official statement following an incident at Harmony Point. "We've always been transparent about our practices," the diplomat explained, his tone one of patient explanation, as if addressing a particularly slow student. "Our burial customs serve dual purposes, honoring our dead and protecting our living. Quantum entanglement capsules allow our ancestors to continue serving humanity even after death." The interviewer, still attempting to grasp the implications, pressed further. "And the pocket dimensions where the Cathari vessels were sent?" "Standard containment procedure," the diplomat responded smoothly. "They haven't been harmed, merely relocated to a secure location. We'd be happy to discuss their return once appropriate reparations and security guarantees are established." Behind closed doors, however, the Confederation's military intelligence division was in full-blown crisis mode. Their entire understanding of human technological capabilities had been based on observed weapon systems and energy signatures. Not a single assessment had considered scanning human cemeteries for quantum manipulation technology. "Because who?" muttered the Hazrati Chief of Intelligence, reviewing the updated threat assessments, "would look for advanced weaponry in a field of dead bodies." His assistant hesitated before speaking. "Sir, preliminary analysis suggests their hobby gardens might actually be bioengineered defensive ecosystems. And their sports competitions," the assistant cleared their throat, "appear to be combat training scenarios disguised as entertainment." The chief buried his face in his appendages. "Tell the council we need to reassess everything. And I mean everything." 6 standard months after the Harmony Point incident, the Confederation released its updated protocols regarding human territories. The 15,000-page document could have been summarized in 5 words. Just leave them alone, seriously. However, galactic bureaucracies being what they were, the document instead laid out exhaustive procedures covering everything from trade negotiations to emergency landings, all carrying the same underlying message: maintain a safe distance from human burial sites at all costs. The most significant change came in the form of newly established buffer zones around all human colonies. These respectful engagement perimeters extended exactly 1 kilometer beyond any identified cemetery, a distance that, coincidentally, matched the activation range of the quantum defense grid. Any diplomatic vessel approaching human worlds was required to transmit identification and intent continuously. An unannounced approach was grounds for defensive recalibration of spatial coordinates, a bureaucratic way of saying, "We will quantum zap you into another dimension." Meanwhile, Commander DRX, whose career had suffered what his superiors diplomatically termed a significant setback and what everyone else called the most spectacular failure since the Arcturian attempt to domesticate black holes, was quietly reassigned to catalog space debris in an uninhabited system. His official report on the incident had been classified, then redacted, and finally used as the foundation for the new protocols that now dictated every interaction with humanity. The lesson had been learned. Underestimate human customs at your own peril. Here's the refined and structured rewrite with improved clarity and flow. At the newly established Confederation Military Academy, a mandatory course was quickly introduced: Xenocultural Intelligence. Why ignoring it will get you erased from reality. However, beyond the immediate political fallout, the most profound consequence was the philosophical upheaval rippling through galactic society. For eons, many species had abandoned physical remains in favor of energy transference or consciousness, uploading, believing it to be the next step in evolution. But now, they were left questioning. Had they lost something valuable in the process? The Mori, who had long disintegrated their dead and scattered their particles into space, made a surprising announcement. They would establish their first memorial conservation facility. They were careful not to call it a cemetery, to avoid potential copyright infringement lawsuits from humanity's notoriously aggressive intellectual property lawyers. The humans have accomplished something remarkable, mused the renowned philosopher Zix of Bew in their best-selling work. They have transformed the ultimate farewell into an enduring guardianship. Their dead do not merely rest, they actively protect. Is there a more profound expression of a species' values than converting remembrance into defense? Meanwhile, xenoanthropologists, scrambling to save face, flooded the academic world with a sudden wave of revised research papers. Titles included Beyond Storage, the Multidimensional Significance of Human Burial Practices. We totally knew this all along, reinterpreting early signs of quantum manipulation in human funerary customs. Even Dr. Crow, whose 17-volume treatise on human waste storage facilities had become a galactic embarrassment, hastily published an 18th volume, Metaphorical Language in My Previous Publications, a clarification. Yet the most profound shift was in how the galaxy now perceived humans. The quaint image of charming newcomers with primitive superstitions had been permanently shattered. In its place emerged a realization far more unsettling. Humanity had weaponized death itself. They had transformed grief into guardianship and memory into military might. They had read the galaxy's dismissive assessments of their burial practices, and simply smiled, knowing the true power they wielded. In a rare moment of public candor, Vixar, a leading strategist, summed it up best. We thought them primitive for clinging to their dead. In reality, they were pragmatic beyond our comprehension. We separate sentiment from strategy. They merged them and created something none of us imagined possible. And so, the Great Galactic Confederation, with its millions of years of collective wisdom, found itself humbled by a species that had only recently mastered faster-than-light travel. The cosmos, it seemed, had a sense of humor after all. Across diplomatic gatherings in the galaxy, a new toast became fashionable among those who dealt with humans. To those who sleep, yet still stand guard, to which the humans would always respond with their own, more ancient toast. To those who came before, and still protect what lies ahead. And if the more observant members of the Confederation noticed that humans appeared unsurprised by the entire affair, almost as if they had been waiting for someone to finally figure it out, well, that was just another mysterious human trait to file away for future consideration, preferably from a safe distance. After all, if a species could turn cemeteries into quantum defense grids for centuries without anyone noticing, who knew what other innocent cultural practices might suddenly reveal themselves to be technological marvels in disguise? The galaxy had learned its lesson. Never underestimate the deceptively simple-looking primates from that unremarkable spiral arm. The pinnacle of evolution indeed. How adorable.